The Tiger I tank stands out as one of the most iconic and feared weapons of World War II. A machine that combined raw firepower with a presence that could strike fear into the hearts of any soldier who faced it. From the moment it rolled onto the battlefield, it became a symbol of German engineering prowess. A fortress on tracks that seemed nearly invincible. Its 88mm gun was capable of destroying enemy tanks at ranges where most Allied weapons couldn't even hope to retaliate, and its thick armor made frontal assaults a dangerous gamble. In many ways, the Tiger I wasn't just a tank. It was a psychological weapon. A looming steel predator that altered the way battles were fought and feared. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Tiger I was its combination of firepower and armor. Its main gun could punch through the heaviest Allied armor, giving German crews the ability to engage and destroy enemy tanks before they could respond. Coupled with armor that was nearly impervious to standard anti-tank weapons of the early war years, it made frontal attacks extremely risky for any opposition. This combination of offense and defense allowed the Tiger to dominate many engagements, particularly in the early years of its deployment. Commanders often positioned Tigers strategically, where a single tank could hold a choke point, destroy multiple enemy vehicles, and retreat before facing overwhelming numbers. However, the Tiger I was not invincible in every sense. Its heavy armor and complex engineering made it slower and less maneuverable than lighter tanks, like the Soviet T-34 or the American M4 Sherman. This meant it could be outflanked or bogged down in difficult terrain, making strategy and positioning critical for its effectiveness. Additionally, its mechanical complexity made maintenance a constant challenge. The tank required highly skilled crews and dedicated logistics support to keep it operational. And in harsh wartime conditions, breakdowns were not uncommon. Fuel consumption was high. Spare parts were limited. And recovery of a damaged Tiger could be a dangerous and time-consuming operation. These factors meant that while the Tiger I was a terror on the battlefield, it demanded careful handling and could not simply be thrown into every fight without risk. Beyond its technical features, the Tiger I had a profound psychological impact. Allied soldiers who encountered it often described it as a monster, a seemingly unstoppable force. Its very presence on the battlefield could slow advances, force commanders to rethink their tactics, and even lower morale. Stories abound of tanks being abandoned, soldiers hesitating to advance, or units altering their movements simply because a Tiger had been spotted. The roar of its engine, the silhouette of its massive frame, and the devastating accuracy of its main gun combined to create an aura of invincibility. Even though it did have vulnerabilities that skilled opponents could exploit, the production of the Tiger I also reflected a broader German philosophy of quality over quantity. Unlike Soviet tanks or American Shermans, which were produced in vast numbers, Tigers were expensive, time-consuming to build, and reserved for elite units. This made each tank a prized asset, and crews often developed a deep bond with their vehicle, treating it almost as a living weapon. This exclusivity contributed both to its battlefield effectiveness and to the mystique that surrounded it during the war. Ultimately, the Tiger I was more than just a tank. It was a symbol of the extremes of engineering, strategy, and psychological warfare in World War II. Its power, presence, and influence shaped battles and left a lasting legacy in military history. While it had limitations, its combination of firepower, armor, and intimidation made it one of the deadliest tanks of the conflict. And its story continues to fascinate historians, enthusiasts, and anyone intrigued by the deadly machines of war. The Tiger I teaches us that sometimes, the fear a weapon inspires can be as impactful as the damage it delivers, and that engineering brilliance can create legends that endure long after the battles have ended. The Soviet T-34 is often hailed as one of the most influential and effective tanks of World War II. And for good reason. Unlike the heavily armored and powerful Tiger I, the T-34 combined mobility, durability, and innovative design in a way that allowed it to dominate the Eastern Front. Its true strength wasn't just in raw firepower or armor. It was in its ability to adapt, to be produced in huge numbers, and to consistently outmaneuver and outlast many of the German tanks it faced. The T-34 became more than just a machine of war. It became a symbol of Soviet resilience and industrial ingenuity, capable of turning the tide in some of the fiercest battles of the war. One of the defining features of the T-34 was its sloped armor, a design innovation that allowed shells to deflect rather than penetrate, giving it protection far beyond what its thickness alone would suggest. This made frontal assaults by German tanks like the Panzer III or Panzer IV far more difficult and costly. At the same time, the T-34 was fast and maneuverable, able to navigate the harsh terrain of the Soviet Union, including mud, snow, and forested areas, where heavier German tanks often struggled. This combination of speed and protection gave Soviet crews the tactical flexibility to outflank and ambush German forces, striking in ways that heavier, slower tanks could not respond to. The T-34's production was another key to its success. The Soviets embraced a philosophy of quantity combined with simplicity. While German tanks like the Tiger I were expensive and time-consuming to manufacture, the T-34 could be built quickly, repaired easily, and put into the hands of large numbers of crews. This approach allowed the Red Army to replace losses rapidly, maintain momentum in offensives, and overwhelm German forces with sheer numbers. Factories operated at an astonishing pace, often under difficult conditions, to ensure that the T-34 remained the backbone of the Soviet armored forces throughout the war. In this sense, the tank wasn't just a piece of technology. It was a strategic tool that leveraged industrial might as effectively as battlefield tactics. The versatility of the T-34 also set it apart. It could serve in a variety of roles, from frontline assault to defensive operations, and was continually upgraded with better guns, armor, and other improvements as the war progressed. Crews appreciated its reliability. It could withstand damage that would disable lighter tanks and keep moving, a critical factor in the brutal and chaotic battles of the Eastern Front. This durability, combined with its ease of operation, meant that Soviet tankers could engage in extended campaigns without the same level of logistical support required for heavier German tanks. The T-34's resilience turned it into a dependable partner in the grinding warfare that characterized the fight against the Wehrmacht. Beyond its technical advantages, the T-34 carried immense psychological weight. German soldiers often feared it not just because of its performance, but because it represented an unstoppable tide of Soviet armor. The vast numbers of T-34s rolling into battle created a sense of inevitability, showing that even if individual tanks could be destroyed, the overall force could not easily be halted. It was a machine that combined engineering efficiency with the ability to inspire both confidence in its crews and caution, or even dread, in its enemies. The T-34's impact on the war cannot be overstated. It helped turn the tide on the Eastern Front, particularly in key battles such as Kursk, where numbers, speed, and tactical flexibility played as much a role as firepower. Its legacy continued long after World War II, influencing tank design worldwide and proving that innovation doesn't always mean building the heaviest or most complex machine. It means creating a system that balances protection, mobility, production, and adaptability. Ultimately, the T-34 exemplifies how a tank can be more than just a weapon. It's a testament to strategic thinking, industrial capacity, and the ability to adapt to the realities of modern warfare. Its combination of mobility, armor, and mass production allowed it to dominate the battlefield in a way that heavier, more powerful tanks often could not. The T-34 reminds us that in war, effectiveness isn't just measured in how much damage a weapon can inflict, but in how consistently and reliably it can shape the outcomes of battles. And in that regard, few tanks of World War II can match its influence and legacy. The American M4 Sherman tank occupies a unique place in the story of World War II. Often overshadowed in popular memory by heavier tanks like the German Tiger I or the Soviet T-34. Yet, the Sherman was one of the most important and effective armored vehicles of the conflict. Not because it was the most powerful or heavily armored, but because it was reliable, versatile, and available in numbers that could overwhelm the enemy. Its strength lay in its adaptability and the strategic thinking that allowed the Allies to use it as the backbone of their armored forces across multiple theaters of war. From the outset, the Sherman was designed with practicality in mind. Unlike tanks that prioritized extreme firepower or armor thickness, the Sherman balanced mobility, durability, and ease of maintenance. American factories could produce Shermans rapidly, and their relative simplicity meant that crews could be trained quickly. Repairs could be performed in the field, and spare parts were widely available. This reliability was critical in campaigns where mechanical breakdowns could mean the difference between victory and defeat. While the tank might be outgunned by a Tiger I at long range, it could be repaired and returned to the fight far more easily, ensuring a constant presence on the battlefield. The sheer numbers in which Shermans were deployed gave them an enormous strategic advantage. While Germany produced a limited number of elite tanks, the Allies could field hundreds or even thousands of Shermans in a single offensive. This allowed them to engage in coordinated armored assaults, saturate enemy positions, and maintain relentless pressure on Axis forces. In battles across North Africa, Italy, and Normandy, the Sherman's combination of quantity and reliability meant that Allied forces could absorb losses without losing operational effectiveness. In many ways, the Sherman exemplified the principle that war is not just about individual brilliance but about sustained, coordinated action. Versatility was another hallmark of the Sherman. It served in multiple roles, from infantry support to anti-tank engagements, and could be modified with specialized equipment for mine clearing, bridge laying, and amphibious operations. This adaptability made it invaluable in combined arms strategies, where tanks needed to work in concert with infantry, artillery, and air support. Commanders could rely on the Sherman to fill a wide range of battlefield needs, giving them flexibility that heavier, more specialized tanks could not match. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a platform that could evolve with the tactical situation, ensuring that it remained relevant even as the war progressed. The Sherman also carried significant psychological and logistical advantages. Allied troops trusted its reliability, knowing that the tank was less likely to fail in harsh conditions than some of its more complex counterparts. Meanwhile, German soldiers, though often wary of its numbers and mobility, found that the Sherman's effectiveness increased not just from its firepower but from its persistent presence on the battlefield. The constant stream of Shermans advancing in well-coordinated formations could overwhelm even the most determined defenders, turning strategic pressure into tactical results. It's important to recognize that while the Sherman may not have had the raw punch of a Tiger or the sloped armor of a T-34, its design philosophy reflected a profound understanding of war. In essence, it was a machine that maximized efficiency, reliability, and strategic impact. It taught an important lesson. Sometimes, the most deadly weapon isn't the one that can destroy the most in a single shot, but the one that can sustain operations, maintain pressure, and adapt to the evolving needs of the battlefield. Ultimately, the M4 Sherman was more than just a tank. It was a symbol of Allied industrial power, strategic thinking, and teamwork. It exemplified the idea that quantity, reliability, and adaptability can be as decisive as raw firepower. The Sherman's legacy endures not because it was the heaviest or most intimidating tank of World War II, but because it was consistently effective across multiple theaters of war, supporting countless operations and helping to tip the scales in favor of the Allies. Its story reminds us that in warfare, resilience and adaptability often matter as much as strength, and the Sherman embodied both in ways few other tanks could. During World War II, both Axis and Allied powers explored the limits of armored warfare, pushing tank design to extremes in ways that often blurred the line between innovation and impracticality. While tanks like the Tiger I, T-34, and M4 Sherman defined the main battles of the war, a select group of experimental and super-heavy tanks represented a different kind of ambition, a pursuit of unmatched firepower, impenetrable armor, and psychological dominance on the battlefield. These vehicles were feats of engineering, but they were also warnings of how far technology can outpace strategy and logistics. Germany, in particular, was obsessed with creating tanks that could break the stalemate of the battlefield and inspire fear in Allied troops. The Tiger II, often called the King Tiger, exemplified this philosophy. With armor up to 150 mm thick and a long 88 mm gun capable of destroying any Allied tank at extreme ranges, it was nearly impervious to the weapons deployed against it. Its sheer size and presence could dominate a battlefield. But with that power came significant drawbacks. The Tiger II was slower and heavier than most tanks, consuming massive amounts of fuel and requiring meticulous maintenance. Its immense weight made it prone to mechanical failure and limited its mobility, particularly in difficult terrain like mud, snow, or narrow roads. While terrifying when deployed effectively, the Tiger II demonstrated that extreme power could be as much a logistical challenge as a tactical advantage. Even more extreme was the Maus, Germany's super-heavy prototype tank, designed to weigh nearly 200 tons. It was intended to be an unstoppable fortress capable of crushing anything in its path. It was a marvel of engineering on paper, with armor that could deflect almost any contemporary weapon and a gun designed to obliterate enemy fortifications. In practice, however, the Mouse was virtually unusable in real combat. Its weight made bridges impassable, transportation difficult, and maneuvering slow and cumbersome. Only a few prototypes were ever built, and they never saw action. The Mouse, like many super heavy tank projects, highlighted the tension between innovation and practicality. A technically brilliant machine that could never achieve strategic impact in the war's fluid and fast-moving battles. The Allies also experimented with heavier tanks, though generally with more attention to balance between firepower, mobility, and production feasibility. The American T-28 Super Heavy tank, for instance, was designed for breaking fortified positions and featured massive armor and armament. Like the German Super Heavies, its size and weight limited operational use, but it provided valuable lessons in armored design and paved the way for post-war developments in tank engineering. These experimental projects reflected a mindset in which pushing technological boundaries was as much about morale and deterrence as it was about battlefield efficiency. What makes these super heavy and experimental tanks particularly fascinating is the mindset behind them. Engineers and military planners were testing the limits of materials, firepower, and armor, creating machines that were as much statements of technological ambition as they were practical weapons. In some cases, the very presence of such a tank, even if it never fired a shot, could influence enemy strategy, forcing opposing forces to divert resources and adjust tactics to account for a perceived threat. They became symbols of power, embodying the idea that engineering could impose dominance through sheer scale and intimidation. Yet the story of these tanks also serves as a cautionary tale. No matter how formidable a weapon may appear, it cannot operate effectively without support, logistics, and realistic strategic planning. The Tiger II and Mouse, for example, were limited by fuel shortages, mechanical complexity, and production delays, meaning that their potential impact was often reduced to isolated appearances rather than sustained battlefield influence. They demonstrate that technological extremes alone cannot win wars. Effectiveness requires a balance of design, adaptability, and practical application. Ultimately, experimental and super heavy tanks represent a thrilling chapter in the history of World War II armored warfare. They pushed engineers to innovate in ways that challenged conventional thinking, influencing post-war tank design and shaping military concepts for decades. At the same time, they remind us that ambition has limits, and that the deadliest weapon is not always the largest or most heavily armed, but the one that harmonizes firepower, mobility, reliability, and strategy. These tanks, whether deployed or merely prototyped, left a legacy that is as much about human ingenuity and imagination as it is about battlefield destruction, inspiring awe and fascination long after the last shots of the war were fired.